Welcome to the Tired Thinker, where words slow down and thoughts take the long way home. Tonight's quiet wandering drifts through something both familiar and strange: language, and the little paradoxes hiding inside the way we make meaning. Every word we speak is both a bridge and a boundary. It connects, yet it limits. It points toward truth, yet never quite captures it. We say, "I understand," though what we really mean is, "I have my version of this." We chase the perfect phrase, knowing deep down that words will always fall a little short of what we feel. And maybe that's the quiet beauty of it, that meaning isn't fixed, but alive. That it shimmers differently in every listener, every tongue, every silence between syllables. So tonight, let's think softly about this: how language shapes thought, how words both reveal and disguise, and how the spaces between them might be where the real meaning lives. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it right now in your small corner of the world? It's strange, isn't it, that we're scattered across the map, yet here we are, pausing together, wondering how we ever manage to understand one another at all. If this quiet space helps you see language, or yourself, a little more clearly, I'd be grateful if you gave this video a gentle like, or softly subscribed. It helps this small, tired corner of the internet reach others who love to think slowly too. Now, let's begin. When people talk, the first thing we notice is sound, the rhythm of speech, the choice of words, the pauses that slip between them. But the real weight of language often hides in what we do not say. Silence is not the absence of meaning, it is the space that holds it. Every sentence, even the most direct one, carries a shadow version of itself. Between the words and pauses, meaning hides, waiting for someone to notice. Imagine two people at a dinner table. One asks, "Are you okay?" The other says, "I'm fine." The words themselves are simple. On the surface, they resolve the question. But in the tone, the pause before speaking, the refusal to look up, something larger lives. The listener may feel the truth pressing against the quiet. The "I'm fine" becomes a sentence dressed in silence. What's left unsaid says more than the words ever could. Language gives us tools to shape thought, but it also creates walls around what we can express. A sentence is both a window and a border. It reveals, but it also hides. When we choose words, we define limits. We set a line where expression stops and silence begins. This border, though invisible, carries meaning as deep as the words themselves. Think of a courtroom where a witness pauses before answering, or a teacher who stays quiet after asking a hard question. That pause becomes part of the language. It speaks through absence. We grow up believing that language helps us communicate clearly. But real communication often happens in the gaps. A friend's silence after hearing bad news. A partner's quiet after an argument. A student's wordless stare when they don't understand. Each is full of information. These moments show that speech is not the only medium for meaning. The absence of words can reveal emotion more precisely than any vocabulary list. Writers know this. Good writing depends on restraint. The best lines are not overloaded with adjectives or complex phrases. They leave room for the reader to enter, to think, to feel. Hemingway called it the iceberg theory. What's visible on the surface is small compared to what lies below. A silent sentence works the same way. The writer builds a space that invites the reader to discover what remains unspoken. When we read, "He didn't come home," we fill the silence with story, emotion. and memory. The missing details are what make the line powerful. In a conversation, silence has many shapes. There's the comfortable quiet between friends who understand each other without speaking. There's the tense silence of a room after an insult. There's the reflective silence when someone realizes something important. Each type of silence holds a different meaning. It becomes a form of grammar. Where punctuation guides reading, silence guides emotion. It can emphasize, question, or resist. Consider how silence works in different cultures. In Japan, silence often signals respect or thoughtfulness. In the United States, it can make people uneasy. They rush to fill it with chatter. In some indigenous traditions, silence is part of listening, a sign of attention rather than withdrawal. So meaning doesn't just hide in silence. It changes shape depending on who is listening and where. What one culture hears as awkward, another might hear as wise. Silence also plays a role in power. In workplaces, the person who stays quiet can sometimes control the flow of conversation. A well-timed pause during a negotiation can shift the tone more effectively than a long argument. Politicians use silence strategically too. After making a bold claim, they stop speaking, letting the audience fill the gap with their own thoughts. In that quiet moment, people project their beliefs onto the silence. The sentence becomes a mirror. Even in personal relationships, silence often decides what survives. An apology half-finished, a truth left unsaid, a goodbye avoided, each one lingers. We like to think words fix things, but silence can heal or harm depending on how it's used. A quiet pause between people can be an act of compassion, allowing space for understanding. Or it can be a refusal, a wall that divides. The difference lies in intention. Think about grief. When someone loses a loved one, we often feel pressure to say something comforting. But many who grieve say the most meaningful support comes from those who simply sit beside them in silence. Words in that moment can shrink the vastness of loss. Silence, on the other hand, lets pain breathe. It honors what cannot be put into sentences. Silence also shapes memory. When we recall moments from the past, the dialogue we remember is rarely exact. What remains clear are the silences, the seconds of hesitation, the unspoken thoughts that followed a conversation. Our memories edit language into emotion. They highlight what wasn't said. That's how the silent sentence stays alive in the mind. It keeps meaning open. In classrooms, silence can be either a threat or an opportunity. Teachers often fear it. When a question needs no answer, they rush to fill the air with explanations. But sometimes the pause is the point. A student may be thinking deeply, forming a response. In those seconds, silence becomes thought in motion. A teacher who allows that space communicates trust. The unsaid becomes part of learning. Technology makes silence harder to find. Our messages arrive instantly, and empty spaces feel like mistakes. A text that goes unanswered becomes a signal of neglect or anger. But this new rhythm also gives silence new power. When someone chooses not to reply, that choice carries meaning. Digital silence is not absence, it's a statement. In an age of constant speech, quiet becomes rare enough to feel radical. There's also a moral dimension to silence. Sometimes staying quiet can be complicity. Other times, it's protection. When someone witnesses injustice and says nothing, their silence becomes part of the harm. But when someone chooses silence to protect privacy, dignity, or reflection, it becomes an act of care. The line between the two is thin and always shifting. Meaning hides there too. Between courage and caution. In art, silence works like negative space in a painting. The blank area around the image defines the image itself. Without the space, the form loses shape. Music uses silence in the same way. A rest between notes gives rhythm and emotion. The power of a symphony often lives in the moment just before sound returns. Even in spoken poetry, the pause between lines gives breath to meaning. The silent sentence in art is what allows emotion to move freely. Science, too, relies on silence, though in a different form. When researchers collect data, the gaps between results often lead to discovery. The unexplained, the unmeasured, the unspoken hypothesis. These silences push knowledge forward. A scientist's silent sentence might be a question that cannot yet be answered. If language is a tool, silence is its handle. Without it, we could not hold our thoughts steady. The unsaid gives structure to the said. It allows space for listening, for ambiguity, for change. Every conversation, every page of writing, balances sound and quiet. The louder the world becomes, the more meaning hides inside what isn't spoken. A silent sentence doesn't need to be empty. It's full of potential, of what could have been said but wasn't. It asks us to listen differently, not only to words, but to the air around them. When someone pauses before speaking, that pause is part of their story. When a writer ends a paragraph with a lingering thought, the silence afterward completes the meaning. So when we speak, we should remember that every sentence casts a shadow. The words tell one story, the silence tells another. What's left unsaid does not vanish, it waits quietly for someone willing to hear. Words look simple on the surface. They seem like clear tools meant to carry thought from one mind to another. Yet each word also traps what it carries. A word protects meaning, but at the same time, it limits how that meaning moves. It's like a thin skin stretched over an idea, holding it together, but keeping it from growing. Without words, thought might float too freely to share. With words, it risks hardening into something smaller than it was. Think about a child trying to describe a dream. They might say, it was a big house, but not really a house, and there was light everywhere, but not like sunlight. They reach for words, but the dream keeps slipping away. Every word they choose cuts away part of what they mean. The dream doesn't fit the shape of language. Still, without words, they can't bring it out into the world. The words protect the idea just long enough for someone else to glimpse it, but never fully. This is what words do all the time. They keep our thoughts from vanishing, but they also fence them in. The word love carries centuries of emotion, poetry, and ritual. Yet, when someone says, "I love you," the phrase is both too big and too small. It protects the feeling. It gives it a shape that others can recognize. But it also blocks the deeper texture of that feeling, the exact tone, the flicker of memory, the warmth behind it. The listener receives something, but never everything. In science, this same pattern appears with precision. A physicist uses the word mass to describe an object's resistance to acceleration. It's a clean, reliable word. But the concept it stands for is not simple. It stretches across equations, theories, and paradoxes. The word protects that complexity by giving it a name that people can work with. Yet, it also hides the mystery. Once named, mass becomes familiar, and familiarity dulls wonder. The word skin thickens until we forget the strangeness underneath. Poets, philosophers, and linguists have all wrestled with this tension. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein said that the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. He meant that words build the frame of what we can imagine or share. Outside that frame, thought becomes fog. A word's job is to hold thought still long enough to show it. But that stillness comes at a cost. It stops movement. Ideas breathe when they can shift shape. Words press them into fixed forms. Think about slang. A new phrase starts as fresh energy, alive, vivid, specific to a moment. Lit, vibe, ghosting. Each began as a spark. Over time, repetition wears that spark down. Once a word becomes common, it grows a thick shell of habit. Its skin stops letting light through. That's why people invent new words again and again to shed old skins that no longer fit. Language evolves to breathe again. In conversation, this process happens in real time. Picture two coworkers in a meeting. One says, "We need to pivot." The other nods, but what do they both mean? Pivot might mean change direction, rethink the strategy, or abandon a plan. The word gives safety. It signals control and clarity, but its skin hides confusion. Nobody questions it because it sounds right. Jargon often works like that. It protects ideas by making them sound complete, even when they aren't. Writers know this trap well. When a writer describes a forest, they might say, "The trees were dark." That word dark seems harmless, but it already guides the reader's mood. Dark can mean peaceful, gloomy, mysterious, or thick with life. The word protects one version of the forest and blocks the rest. The more specific the language becomes, the more it narrows what can be imagined. To write clearly is to accept that every word saves one idea at the cost of another. Even in daily life, our wordskins shape how we see ourselves. When someone says, "I'm shy," the word gives them a way to explain their behavior. It protects them from misunderstanding. But over time, it can also become a cage. They start to see every quiet moment as proof of that word. The label becomes thicker than the person it describes. Words about identity, like introvert, creative, or leader, work this way too. They hold meaning steady, but they also freeze it. Languages across the world handle this tension differently. Some, like English, favor sharp distinctions and fixed definitions. Others, like Japanese or Hopi, leave more open space for context. In Japanese, the word amai describes the sweet dependence felt between close people, a concept that English can only circle around with phrases like trust or affection. The English speaker protects meaning through clear borders. The Japanese speaker protects it through shared understanding. Each way of speaking wears its own kind of skin. The danger comes when we forget the skin is there. Words start to feel natural, inevitable, as if they grew from the things they name, but they don't. The word tree doesn't carry the smell of bark or the sound of wind in leaves. It's a symbol, not a substance. When we forget that, we start to live inside our own wordskins, mistaking the cover for the content. That's when language stops breathing. Children remind us how fresh words can be before the skin thickens. A toddler might call every animal a dog, not because they don't know the difference, but because dog is the only sound they have for living things that move. The word stretches wide and alive, thin and flexible. Later, as vocabulary grows, the skin thickens. Dog becomes precise but narrow. The idea fits better, but it breathes less. Technology adds another layer. Our communication now runs through systems that value speed over depth. Texts captions, and posts shrink ideas into small containers. Each word becomes armor against misunderstanding. Emojis, hashtags, and abbreviations patch meaning where words can't reach. They protect ideas long enough to survive the scroll, but they flatten them too. A heart emoji can't hold the weight of actual affection. It's a safe shell, smooth and empty. Still, the skin is necessary. Without it, dots would dissolve. The trick is to know it's there, to see language as a living surface, not a solid wall. When people speak honestly, they stretch the skin thin enough for breath to pass through. Think of someone saying, "I don't know how to say this." That phrase tears the skin a little. It lets vulnerability leak out. In that moment, the words protect the idea just enough to show its shape without sealing it in. Poetry works by thinning the skin on purpose. A poem's rhythm, image, and break in line let meaning move again. The poet uses words not as cages, but as transparent layers. Each one holds a little air, enough for emotion to live inside. The sentence, "The world is too much with us," protects the feeling of exhaustion from modern life, but it also lets us breathe with it. We recognize the thought, but we also feel it. That's what happens when language stays alive, when the word skin remains soft. In every field, law, science, politics, art, the challenge is the same. We need words to protect our ideas from chaos, but we must not forget that they also trap them. When we speak, we wrap meaning in layers of habit and history. The goal is not to escape language, but to keep it flexible. A word should be a living skin, not a shell. When we listen closely, we can still hear the faint breath of the idea moving beneath. When we think about language, we often imagine it as something we control. We choose our words. We decide how to speak, what to write, and when to stay quiet. But if we look closer, it becomes clear that language also controls us. The words we use do more than describe the world. They build the way we see it. Language is a mirror that reflects us, but also a mold that shapes us. Every sentence we speak carves small patterns into how we think, what we value, and how we understand ourselves. Imagine a person who speaks two languages, English and Mandarin. When they switch from one to the other, they don't just change sounds, they shift worlds. In English, they might say, "I think it's raining." In Mandarin, they might say, "Sha yu, it rained." The English version focuses on the speaker's thought, while the Mandarin version focuses on the event itself. One centers the mind, the other, the world. The same person becomes slightly different with each tongue, more self-focused in one, more outward in the other. The mirror tilts and the reflection changes. Language builds habits of thought. Every time we describe something, we practice a certain way of noticing. If a language forces you to mark time, past, present, or future, you become sensitive to when things happen. If it asks you to specify gender, you start to see it everywhere. If it leaves space for uncertainty, you get comfortable with ambiguity. Over years, those habits shape the mind. We think we're just speaking, but we're also training ourselves. A small example shows this well. In English, we say, "I broke the vase." In Japanese, the sentence might come out closer to, "The vase broke." The difference seems minor, but it affects responsibility. English makes the speaker the center of the event. Japanese allows for a softer boundary between action and outcome. Studies show that English speakers remember who caused an accident more often, while Japanese speakers remember what happened. The structure of a sentence changes the shape of memory. The mirror doesn't just reflect, it teaches the face to look a certain way. Children grow inside this mirror. A child learning their first words begins to see the world through them. When they learn the word hot, they also learn a boundary between safety and danger. When they learn mine, they begin to understand ownership. Language gives shape to what they feel, but also decides what feelings can exist at all. Some emotions have no words in English, like the Portuguese saudade, the deep ache for something lost but never fully gone. A child without that word may still feel something similar, but they won't know how to frame it. Language doesn't just record experience, it edits it. Culture grows inside language too. Words carry memory, and grammar carries worldview. In many indigenous languages, verbs take forms that show respect or connection to nature. The difference between "it rains" and "rain comes" matters. The first treats rain as an event. The second treats it as a living presence. That linguistic choice shapes the culture's relationship with the world. When the language fades, that way of seeing fades with it. Losing words can mean losing ways of being. We can see this shaping power in everyday life. Consider how people talk about time. In English, time flows forward, as if we're walking into the future. In Aymara, an indigenous language from South America, the future is behind and the past is in front. The logic is simple. You can see the past, you've lived it. The future is unknown, hidden behind you. This reversal changes how people gesture, plan, and imagine. Language sets the stage for how time feels in the body. Even modern technology bends us through language. Online spaces run on short sentences, fragments, and symbols. The platforms we use reward speed over depth. Over time, this changes how we think. We start forming thoughts that fit into captions. Our attention learns to live in smaller units. The tongue's mirror here is not made of glass. It's a glowing screen. The language of the internet trains us to value immediacy, reaction, and rhythm. We don't notice the change because it happens one post at a time. The same quiet shaping happens with gender. English speakers say fireman or chairman and unconsciously tie roles to men. Many languages go further. In Spanish or French, every noun has gender. Chairs are feminine, books masculine. Those assignments seem harmless, but they make the mind group ideas along gendered lines. The effect is subtle but constant. When people speak languages that don't mark gender, they often show different biases in tests. The words don't just describe bias, they build it. Consider how advertising uses this mirror. Marketers know that language can direct desire. The word fresh doesn't only describe something new, it also triggers feelings of purity and renewal. When someone hears luxury, they don't think of a definition, they feel an identity. The words shape who they imagine themselves to be. Over time, the mirror trains people to think through slogans. I deserve it. Because you're worth it. Just do it. Each phrase hides instruction inside inspiration. The reflection becomes self-fulfilling. In politics, language shapes belief even more powerfully. A policy described as welfare might sound like a handout. The same policy described as social support feels communal. The phrase illegal alien paints a person as a threat, while undocumented worker paints them as human. The words change the moral weather. A single shift in phrasing can tilt public opinion, not because facts change, but because the mirror reframes what people see. Language shapes emotion too. When someone learns to label a feeling, anger, shame, longing, they also learn to manage it. Psychology calls this affect labeling. The act of naming changes the body's response. Saying "I'm angry" can reduce physiological stress, but the language we inherit also limits our range. If your culture doesn't name quiet sadness, you might mistake it for fatigue. If your language lacks a word for awe, You might pass by beauty without noticing it. The mirror reflects only what it knows how to show. There's also a personal mirror inside every speaker. The words we use most often shape the tone of our inner voice. Someone who constantly says, "I can't" or "I should" builds a mind tuned to limits. Someone who says, "I'll try" or "I'll learn" builds a mind tuned to motion. These small linguistic habits sculpt self-image. The tongue doesn't just express thought, it rewrites it. The more we repeat certain words, the more they settle into identity. In relationships, language quietly defines the distance between people. The difference between "I love you" and "love you" might seem small, but the missing pronoun shifts the weight of emotion. Formality, slang, tone each signals belonging or distance. Over time, couples, families, and friends develop private vocabularies. They invent nicknames, phrases, or inside jokes that only they understand. These micro-languages become emotional architecture. When the words fade, the closeness often does too. Even silence has its own reflection in this mirror. Different cultures use it differently. In some places, silence means thoughtfulness. In others, it means discomfort. What we call awkward silence in one language might be peaceful pause in another. The way we fill or respect quiet shows how language has trained us to value sound over stillness. The mirror doesn't just shape words, it shapes when we feel safe using them. We think we speak language, but it speaks us too. It shapes the rhythm of our thoughts, the reach of our imagination, the size of our empathy. It teaches us what to notice and what to ignore. When we change our words, we change the mirror slightly, and in doing so, we change ourselves. Every new phrase, every shift in tone, every language we learn becomes another way of seeing our reflection move. ... Every time we speak, we believe we're saying something new. We imagine our words as fresh, drawn from our own minds. But most of what leaves our mouths isn't new at all. It's an echo, a repetition of words, phrases, and patterns that have lived long before us. We inherit them, use them, and pass them on, often without noticing. Language remembers more than we do. It carries traces of every voice that used it before, and those echoes guide how we think and what we believe. Take a simple phrase like "boys will be boys." It rolls off the tongue easily because we've heard it so many times. But inside that phrase sits a whole history of excuses, habits, and power. The words sound casual, even harmless, yet they carry an old echo, one that excuses behavior and teaches silence. When someone repeats it, they're not inventing thought. They're repeating a pattern that's been speaking through generations. The phrase doesn't describe reality. It keeps it in place. This happens everywhere in language. Phrases like "time is money," "success speaks for itself," or "you only live once" feel personal, but they're borrowed scripts. They sound modern, yet they echo the values of the societies that created them. Efficiency, competition, urgency. When we use them, we take part in that same rhythm. Our grammar and vocabulary become channels for ideas older than we are. The echo hides in plain sound. Culture leaves fingerprints in words. In English, we say "fall in love," as if love were a trap or accident. In French, one says "tomber amoureux," which means the same, to fall in love. The idea of love as something you fall into, something beyond control, has become so natural that we forget it's a metaphor. The phrase shapes how people think about emotion, that love happens to us, not through us. We repeat the metaphor and live inside its meaning. A grammar of feeling becomes inherited. Advertising understands echo grammar well. Brands repeat slogans until they stop sounding like slogans and start sounding like truth. Have it your way, because you're worth it. Open happiness. Over time, the echoes settle in our language. We quote them in jokes, use them in conversation, and they slip into thought. When someone says, "Treat yourself," they may not realize they're quoting an old campaign. The line has become part of ordinary speech. The echo has blended into the background. Politics works the same way. Words like freedom, security, or family values are loaded with echoes. They sound universal, but each carries history. When a politician says freedom, they might mean personal liberty, economic opportunity, or control over others. The word's echo changes with context, but its emotional pull stays the same. People hear the echo that fits their beliefs and miss the rest. The repetition of familiar language keeps systems steady because we trust what we've already heard. Even small words carry inherited weight. Take should. It sounds neutral, but it hides judgment. Every "you should" carries an invisible voice. Parents, teachers, rules, culture. It's not your voice, not fully. The word echoes expectations learned long ago. When someone says, "I should be happy," they're repeating a rule built by others, not a feeling discovered within. The grammar of duty speaks before the self does. Echo grammar shows up in how we argue too. Listen to any public debate, and you'll hear the same words repeated in cycles. Rights, justice, truth, fake news, cancel culture. The meanings twist over time, but the phrases stay. Each side believes they're using them correctly, yet both sides are trapped in echoes. The same words bounce back and forth, losing detail and gaining noise. We stop hearing what they mean and start hearing how they sound. The repetition becomes its own truth. Even our private speech, the way we talk to ourselves, echoes others. Think of the voice that says, "You're not good enough," or "You can do better." That tone didn't appear out of nowhere. It's built from voices we've heard before. Parents, teachers, peers, media. We take those voices in, and they form the grammar of our thoughts. When we think we're speaking to ourselves, we're often repeating someone else's rhythm. The echo turns inward. Language itself is a memory system. Every word has lived through centuries of mouths. The word ghost, for instance, once meant spirit or breath. Kind once meant family. Awful once meant full of awe. As words shift, they carry their old meanings like faint shadows. We still say inspire when someone gives us hope, not realizing it comes from to breathe into. The echoes are fossils of thought, hidden in daily speech. We move through them without looking down. Writers and poets often try to break free of echo grammar. They bend language until it feels strange again. When someone like Toni Morrison writes, "Definitions belong to the definers, not the defined," she interrupts the echo. The sentence feels new because it resists the inherited rhythm. Poetry and art pull us out of the grooves carved by habit. They remind us that words can still be made, not just borrowed. But even then, new language grows from old roots. Every invention is a rearrangement of what already existed. Think about slang. A new phrase starts in a community, on fleek, lit, salty, and spreads until it sounds familiar. At first, it carries energy because it belongs to a specific group. But once it spreads, it loses the spark and becomes another echo. What was once rebellion becomes repetition. That's how language breathes. One generation invents, the next repeats. The echo turns into grammar, and grammar turns into memory. Sometimes, echo grammar comforts us. Shared phrases create belonging. When people greet each other with, "How are you?" they don't always expect an answer. They're repeating a small ritual of care. When someone says, "Bless you," after a sneeze, they echo centuries of superstition about the soul escaping the body. These inherited gestures connect us to something larger, even if we don't know why we do them. The echo carries the feeling of home. Language is full of these hand-me-downs. We wear them like secondhand clothes, adjusting them to fit, but rarely making them new. The more we speak, the more we learn how little of our speech is ours alone. We inherit rhythm, tone, idiom, and structure. We repeat to belong. We echo to be understood. And in that repetition, we forget where our words came from or whose thoughts they once carried. Yet every sentence, every phrase, every common expression still hums with old voices. We only need to listen closely to hear them speaking through us. When we speak, we like to think that our words describe reality. We imagine language as a mirror that reflects the world as it is. But language doesn't just show what's out there, it builds what we see. Every noun, verb, and phrase marks the borders of a world we create together. The map of language is not drawn after the fact. It's drawn as we speak, shaping what can exist inside it. Think of how a map works. A map doesn't copy the land, it simplifies it. It decides what to include, what to name, what to ignore. A highway looks as thick as a river. A mountain becomes a triangle. We don't confuse the map with the land, yet we rely on it to move. Language works the same way. When we name something, we're mapping it. We say tree, and the living, breathing organism becomes a category. We see it through a shared shape of sound and meaning. That shared map helps us communicate, but it also filters experience. We don't see the world first and then talk about it. We see the world through the words we already have. Picture a child learning to speak. Before they have words, they experience the world as sensation, light, touch, sound. Then they learn dog, and the next time they see one, the experience changes. The animal is no longer a swirl of movement and sound. It's dog, a known thing. The word builds a fence around it. The child's world gains structure, but loses mystery. The map becomes more detailed, but the land becomes smaller. Cultures draw different maps. In English, we have one word for snow. The Inuit languages have many, each naming a different kind of snow. Soft, packed, drifting, melting. That doesn't mean one group lives in a different world. It means their map allows them to see more detail in the same landscape. Words open or close perception. When a language gives names to specific shades of blue, its speakers learn to see more blues. When it doesn't, the eye still sees color, but the mind doesn't separate it. The map decides what counts as a landmark. The same principle shapes emotion. In English, we talk about sadness, but in some languages, there are finer distinctions. The Japanese word natsukashi means a warm feeling of nostalgia mixed with gratitude. The Portuguese saudade carries longing for something that might never return. English speakers feel those emotions too, but they remain blurred until given names. The words don't describe new emotions, they build them. Once named, they can be shared, remembered, and understood. Language also builds social reality. Consider the word citizen. It's not just a label. It defines belonging, responsibility, and rights. Without that word, the concept of citizenship wouldn't exist in the same way. The word border builds separation between lands that might otherwise blend. The phrase illegal immigrant builds a moral frame that shapes how people think about movement and worth. These are not reflections of objective truth. They are constructs made real by repetition. The world changes when words change. Science depends on this building process too. When early astronomers named the constellations, they turned random stars into patterns. Orion, Cassiopeia, the Big Dipper. Each name made the night sky readable. Later, scientists replaced those myths with mathematical maps, but the same act remained, turning chaos into order through naming. Even gravity began as a word before it became a law. The act of naming shaped discovery, giving a structure that guided what could be known. We do this in daily life as well. When we label someone a friend, enemy, or colleague, we don't just describe a relationship, we define how to act within it. The map directs behavior. Calling someone a failure doesn't only report a fact, it builds an identity. The person starts to see themselves through that name. Change the word and the world shifts. Failure becomes lesson, and the landscape of possibility expands. Language builds time too. Some languages, like English, split time into past, present, and future. Others, like Hopi, don't. They describe events as either complete or ongoing. This difference changes how speakers experience time itself. An English speaker may rush to plan the future. A Hopi speaker may feel more present, less divided from what is happening. The map of time directs how people move through life. Even silence fits within this map. In some cultures, silence is a form of respect. In others, it feels like tension. The meaning of silence depends on the language that surrounds it. The space between words carries the same power to shape reality as the words themselves. The pause after a question, the breath before a confession, the silence between strangers in an elevator, each fits into a learned system of meaning. The map doesn't stop at the edge of speech. Technology has redrawn the map again. Words now move faster and reach farther than ever. Hashtags, captions, and short posts create worlds inside screens. Each phrase, hashtag love, hashtag freedom, hashtag justice, builds its own territory of meaning, reinforced by repetition. The language of social media simplifies complex ideas into signals. We scroll through tiny naps of belief and identity, mistaking them for the land of truth. What we see isn't the world, it's a version of it, drawn in pixels and slogans. Language has always built worlds this way. When people first told stories, they turned the unknown into order. A river became sacred. A mountain became home to spirits. Words shaped the landscape until imagination and geography became inseparable. Even today, when we tell stories about progress, growth, or purpose, we're still building worlds with the same tools, lines of language stretching across the blank map of experience. Every sentence we speak draws another contour, adds another landmark. We believe we're describing the world as it is, but we're always editing, framing, and defining it. The map doesn't wait for us to finish speaking. It grows with every word. And though we can never capture the whole land, we keep talking, tracing the shape of the world we've made, believing it was there all along. We speak to make things clear. We believe that if we choose the right words, truth will stand still long enough for us to see it. But language doesn't hold still. The more we try to pin meaning down, the more it slides away. Words seem to promise precision, but they can only offer versions of truth. Like a mirage, clarity appears close but changes shape when we move toward it. Imagine someone saying, "I just want to be honest." It sounds simple, but what follows is rarely pure truth. Honesty comes filtered through memory, emotion, and tone. The person speaking chooses which part of the story to tell, which words to use, and which to leave behind. Even when the intent is clear, the language bends. Every description of truth becomes an interpretation. The more carefully we try to explain, the more the gaps between words and feelings widen. A scientist writing a research paper faces the same problem. Precision is the goal. Each word is measured, each claim defined. Yet even there, language introduces uncertainty. Terms like significant, suggests, or likely are meant to be exact, but they depend on interpretation. The scientist may believe they are showing reality as it is, but the language they use builds a version of it instead. The clearer the writing becomes, the easier it is to mistake the description for the thing itself. We see the same mirage in daily life. A couple argues about what one of them said a week ago. "You said you'd always be there," one insists. "No," the other replies, "I said I'd try." Both are certain. The words once spoken seemed clear, but meaning isn't a fixed point. It's a moving reflection of time, feeling, and context. The original tone, the look, the silence after the sentence, all of it has changed. When we search for exactness in memory, the truth dissolves like heat on a road. Language depends on shared understanding, but that understanding is always incomplete. When someone says, "I'm fine," it can mean, "I'm okay," "I'm tired," "I don't want to talk," or "Please notice that I'm not okay." The sentence is clear only if the listener already knows the story behind it. Words don't carry meaning by themselves, they borrow it from relationships. The illusion of clarity comes from agreement, not precision. Writers often chase this mirage too. The more they polish a sentence, the more they feel truth slipping away. A poet can spend hours finding the exact word, only to realize that no word will do. Language can point toward emotion, but it can't hold its full weight. When a writer says, "I miss you," it sounds simple, but behind that phrase are memories, sensations, and longing that no sentence can contain. The effort to be exact narrows the experience. Think of translation. A translator faces the impossible task of turning one world of meaning into another. When they translate the Japanese phrase "mono no aware," they might write "a sadness of things." But that English phrase loses the softness, the sense of beauty in impermanence that the original holds. The clearer the translation tries to be, the more it distorts the emotion. The truth of the phrase moves sideways, out of reach. Even in law, where clarity seems most important, the mirage holds. Legal language aims for precision, yet every term creates new questions. A contract that defines every possibility still leaves space for interpretation. Courts exist because language can't settle meaning by itself. The sharper we draw the line, the more edges appear. The act of defining makes new shadows. The mirage also shows up in self-expression. When someone sits in therapy and says, "I feel anxious," they might mean fear, restlessness, guilt, or exhaustion. Naming the feeling helps, but it also limits it. Once it's labeled, it fits into a box. The therapist and the client now share a word, but not necessarily the same experience. The label brings clarity, but takes away nuance. The truth of emotion moves just beyond the edges of the chosen word. We see it in technology too. Our messages and posts rely on quick clarity. Emojis, short phrases, and hashtags make communication fast and simple, but they flatten meaning. "I'm good" can be relief, deflection, or pride. Online, tone disappears. The clearer the sentence looks, the more room there is for misunderstanding. The mirage works faster now because we speak more and listen less. Even art, which tries to escape language, can't avoid this problem. A painter might try to express silence, only to find that viewers see loneliness. A songwriter might describe love, and listeners hear loss. Once art enters words, titles, lyrics, reviews, it enters the same maze. Every explanation becomes another version, never the truth itself. The clearer the interpretation, the more it misses what lives between lines and notes. Our minds crave definition because it gives comfort. To say, this is what it means, feels like safety. But truth isn't something that sits still for inspection. It moves with us. It hides in tone, in pause, in gesture, in silence. When we turn it into sentences, we narrow it to fit inside grammar. The result looks clear, but what we call clarity is often only agreement on illusion. Language is a tool we use to make sense of what can't be fully said. It helps us survive, connect, and share, but it also distorts as it defines. Every attempt to explain makes the truth shimmer just beyond reach. Like travelers in the desert, we chase what we see in words, only to find that it has already shifted into something else. Before we put words to a moment, we feel it. A sunrise, a song, a look from someone we love. All of these arrive as raw experience. They hit us before language. But as soon as we describe them, something changes. Words step in, and the moment turns from sensation into thought. The colors fade into categories. The feeling becomes an idea. In trying to name the experience, we lose some of it. Language lets us share what happens inside us, but it also blurs what was once clear. Imagine standing in the rain. You feel the cool drops on your skin, hear the soft rush of water, smell the earth. For a second, you're just there. No commentary, no story. Then a thought appears. It's beautiful. That small phrase creates distance. The rain becomes an object of appreciation instead of an immediate presence. The mind starts describing rather than living. What was once whole turns into something you can hold in thought. Words make the experience portable, but they also wrap it in static. This happens constantly. We turn the raw flow of life into something we can think about. The moment we say, "I'm happy," the feeling begins to fade into definition. The label sits between us and the sensation. The same happens with pain. Once you call it grief or anger, the emotion changes shape. It becomes a known quantity, something you can discuss, compare, or measure. The pure experience, which once had its own depth and texture, now fits inside a word that can only gesture toward it. Language gives order to experience, and that order helps us survive. Without names, we drown in sensation. But that order also filters what we notice. When a child first learns the word bird, every flying thing becomes the same. The crow, the sparrow, the hawk all blur into one category. The word protects the idea, but it mutes the differences. The child sees less, not more. Over time, we build entire systems of labels that stand between us and the world. We call it knowledge, but it's also distance. Science depends on this process. It turns experience into data, then data into language. When a physicist describes light as both a particle and a wave, they're naming something that refuses to fit into ordinary understanding. The formula gives clarity, but it also hides the wonder of the phenomenon. A rainbow becomes refraction. Thunder becomes shockwave. We need those words to learn and build, but they thin out the mystery. What begins as awe ends as description. Even love goes through this blur. In the early moments of connection, words often fail. People say, "I can't explain it," because the feeling doesn't yet fit into language. Later, when the relationship matures, the same people use phrases like, "we have chemistry," or "it's complicated." Those words replace the direct pulse of experience with manageable shapes. The feeling becomes something to analyze. The rawness gets lost in translation. Art tries to recover what language blurs. A painter may use color to reach where words can't. A musician may use sound to bypass thought. But even then, when we talk about the art, we fall back into language. A viewer says it's beautiful or it's sad, and the static returns. We can't help it. Naming feels like knowing. Yet the act of naming reduces what it touches. We do this even to ourselves. The thoughts that run through the mind each day come as a steady stream of words. That stream filters experience before we notice it. When someone cuts you off in traffic, you don't just feel the shock. You instantly say, "What a jerk." The phrase fills the space that might have held curiosity, surprise, or even humor. The label defines the moment before it has time to unfold. The static of language replaces the silence of experience. Meditation tries to move in the opposite direction. It asks us to notice experience before thought, to feel breath without naming it, to hear sound without identifying it. People who practice often describe moments of stillness that feel more vivid than normal awareness. That's what experience looks like before language filters it. It's not more complex, it's simpler, but deeper. When words quiet down, the world seems sharper. In conversation, the static grows louder. Two people may use the same word, freedom, truth, love, but mean different things. Each word carries echoes of past uses, personal history, and culture. What seems like clarity turns into noise. We think we're sharing experience, but often we're sharing versions of it shaped by language. The static between meanings fills the air. We even turn silence into something to explain. After a pause in conversation, we might say, "I didn't know what to say," as if the pause needed repair. But that silence was experienced too, real and whole before it was named. Words rush in to label, to smooth over the quiet, to keep us in the comfort of expression. In doing so, they blur what was already complete. Words are our way of reaching each other, but they also cloud what we reach for. Every time we translate feeling into speech, we trade some of its truth for the safety of structure. The trade is necessary. We need to share, to think, to record, but the cost is clarity of another kind. Beneath the noise of language lies the pure texture of experience, waiting in the gaps between sentences, before thought turns it into something we can say. When we learn a new word, we often go straight to its definition. We look it up, read the short explanation, and feel the small relief of understanding. The dictionary gives us control. It turns something uncertain into something fixed. But that feeling is an illusion. To define a word is to frame it, not to know it. The act of definition replaces the open space of wonder with the clean surface of order. Imagine a child asking, "What's love?" A parent might open a dictionary and read an intense feeling of deep affection. The words sound tidy, but they miss what the child really asked. The definition lists the edges, but not the center. It describes the shape without touching the experience. The child doesn't want order. They want to understand why their chest feels strange, why they miss someone, why joy and fear live in the same place. The definition ends the question without answering it. Definitions make language seem stable. They give the illusion that words sit still, waiting for us to find them. But words move. Their meanings shift with time, culture, and emotion. The word awful once meant full of awe. Silly once meant innocent. The dictionary marks the moment when a meaning pauses, not where it lives. By the time a definition is printed, the language has already drifted forward. To know a word only through its definition is to study a fossil and call it alive. The dictionary illusion shapes how we think about knowledge itself. In school, we're taught that learning means mastering definitions, memorizing terms, labeling facts, repeating meanings. The result is tidy understanding that feels solid but sits on thin ground. A student can recite what gravity means, but still have no sense of what it feels like to jump and fall. They can define ecosystem, but never notice how the air smells after rain. The definitions give order, but remove texture. The wonder of learning turns into a list of answers. This happens in adulthood too. We face something complex, a feeling, a person, an event, and rush to name it. We call an experience stress, a person toxic, a thought rational. Each label gives us a sense of control, but the moment we define it, the mystery closes. We stop asking what lies beneath. The word becomes a container that replaces the question it was meant to explore. The world feels more manageable, but less alive. Science uses definitions to create clarity, but even in science, definitions bend. The word species has more than a dozen meanings, depending on which biologist you ask. Time in physics changes shape between Newton and Einstein. These shifts don't mean science is wrong. They show that definition is only a snapshot in a moving process. The illusion comes when we mistake that snapshot for the whole picture. We forget that knowledge is an evolving conversation, not a list of fixed meanings. The same pattern shows up in our emotional lives. When someone says, "I'm depressed," the word points to a real experience, but it also narrows it. The label gathers sadness, fatigue, and emptiness under one name, which helps in some ways. It allows people to seek help, to connect, but it also risks shrinking the vast, personal landscape of feeling into a single definition. Once labeled, the feeling becomes something to manage, not something to explore. The order replaces the wonder. Philosophy has wrestled with this for centuries. The philosopher Socrates questioned every definition his students offered. When someone claimed to know what justice meant, he asked for examples, then showed how each example broke the definition. His goal wasn't confusion, it was awareness. He wanted people to see that the moment they thought they knew, they stopped thinking. The dictionary illusion tempts us to stop wondering. Art pushes in the opposite direction. Poets and painters resist definition because they know that meaning shrinks when pinned down. A painting of the night sky doesn't define darkness. A poem about loss doesn't define grief. They invite you to feel without the filter of explanation. That openness is what definitions remove. The dictionary builds fences. Art leaves the gate open. Technology has made the illusion stronger. We no longer need to reach for a dictionary on a shelf. A search bar gives us instant answers. Type a word, and the meaning appears in seconds. The ease feels like intelligence, but it's only retrieval. We know where to find meanings, not how to hold them. The faster we define, the less we wonder. Even in conversation, the urge to define can turn curiosity into control. When someone describes a strange dream, we might jump to say, "That means you're anxious." The statement sounds helpful, but it ends the dialogue. We trade the richness of imagination for the neatness of analysis. We turn the unknown into something safe. The mind loves order, even when it costs depth. The illusion isn't that definitions exist. They're necessary. The illusion is believing they complete the picture. Every word points beyond itself. To define tree is to describe height, leaves, and roots, but it can't capture the sound of wind in the branches. or the feeling of standing beneath one. Definitions organize the world, but they flatten it in the process. The moment we think we've understood something completely, we stop listening to what it might still be saying. Every thought begins as something wordless. It starts as a flicker, an image, a feeling, a rhythm that hasn't yet taken shape. Before we speak, meaning moves freely inside us. But as soon as we reach for words, that meaning begins to shift. The moment sound leaves the mouth, it no longer matches what we meant. Something gets lost between thought and speech, between the private truth and the shared one. Imagine you're trying to explain a dream. In your mind, it's clear: colors, faces, emotions. But when you start talking, the images scatter. It was a forest, you say. But not really a forest, more like a place that felt like one. You try to rebuild what you saw, but the act of speaking changes it. The words replace the experience with an outline. Your listener nods, but what they picture isn't what you meant. The thought that was alive in you becomes something smaller, something that fits inside language. This shift happens in every conversation. Words are not containers that hold meaning. They're bridges that reshape it. When you tell someone, "I'm fine," you might mean, "I'm tired," or "I don't want to talk," or "I'm afraid to say how I feel." The listener hears the version that fits their own understanding. Between your meaning and their hearing, the sentence changes form. Even simple words carry layers that drift apart once spoken. Writers and artists struggle with this gap constantly. A novelist begins with an emotion that can't be named, then spends months trying to capture it on the page. The words bring the feeling closer to form, but never exactly. Each draft feels like translation from a language that doesn't exist. The moment they find clarity, it's already a version, not the thing itself. The story that finally reaches the reader is alive, but it's a cousin of the original thought, not its twin. We think of language as expression, but it's also transformation. Every sentence bends meaning to fit structure. Grammar forces chaos into order. Syntax turns flow into sequence. When we speak, we don't just describe, we choose. We decide where to start, what to include, what to leave unsaid. That choice shapes what meaning survives. A single pause or tone can change everything. "I didn't say he stole the money" means 7 different things depending on which word you stress. The thought stays the same, but the sound changes its path. Even science depends on this shift. A physicist who describes a theory must compress vast intuition into precise words. Terms like dark matter or string simplify mysteries that may never fit human speech. The language of science allows discovery, but it also narrows it. The instant the idea becomes sentence, it obeys the limits of grammar. Thought becomes statement, and something infinite becomes measurable. In relationships, this transformation can be both beautiful and painful. When you tell someone, "I love you," you translate a deep current of emotion into 3 small words. The phrase carries power because it's familiar, but its familiarity also makes it incomplete. Love in your chest is not the same as love in sound. You say it hoping the other person feels what you mean, but they receive only what language allows. The rest lingers between you, unsaid but real. Misunderstanding often grows from this space between meaning and mouth. 2 people can speak the same sentence and live in different worlds. "We need to talk" can sound like care or threat. "I'm sorry" can mean regret or surrender. The words stay the same, but tone, history, and silence fill them with new weight. Each person hears through their own echo of experience. Communication feels simple until you notice how many meanings move beneath the surface. Technology magnifies the problem. Texts and emails strip tone away. A message meant as playful reads as cold. A period at the end of a sentence feels like distance. Emojis try to patch the loss, but they only add more symbols to interpret. We speak faster now, but we understand less. Between typing and reading, meaning keeps shifting, each side filling gaps with their own assumptions. The mouth has changed into the screen, but the distortion remains. Even our inner speech isn't safe from this transformation. When we think, we use words to organize feelings, but those words reshape what we feel. If you tell yourself, "I'm a failure," the phrase builds its own truth. If you say, "I made a mistake," the same memory takes on a softer shape. The mind speaks and listens at once, caught in the same loop of translation. The act of naming experience changes it. Poets sometimes try to work backward, to reach the space before language. They use rhythm, silence, and image to hint at what words can't hold. When someone reads a line like, "the still point of the turning world," they feel something larger than definition. The phrase points toward a truth that language can't fix in place. The poem doesn't capture meaning, it circles it, letting it breathe. Every act of speech walks this line. We open our mouths to share what lives inside us, but by the time it reaches the air, it's already different. The sound carries shape, tone, and breath, but not the whole thought. The listener catches what they can, adds their own meaning, and passes it on. What began as pure intention turns into interpretation, moving farther from where it started. Between meaning and mouth, the sentence is born and begins to change. Every language depends on pauses. They mark where one thought ends and another begins, where breath replaces sound. But silence does more than organize speech. It carries meaning that grammar can't hold. A pause can comfort, accuse, forgive, or confess without a single word spoken. Silence lives inside conversation like white space on a page, empty only to those who don't know how to read it. Imagine two people sitting in a car after an argument. The words have stopped, but something thick fills the air. One person looks out the window. The other grips the steering wheel. No sentence could describe what that moment contains. The silence says everything. It holds regret, pride, fear, and love all at once. Grammar could try to unpack it. Phrases like "I'm sorry" or "I didn't mean it," but none would fit. The truth is already there, breathing between them. We often treat silence as a failure of communication. In school and work, we're taught to fill space, to prove engagement through speech. But some meanings refuse to be spoken. When a doctor sits quietly beside a grieving family, their silence holds more care than any words could. When a friend listens without interruption, the pause tells the speaker they're safe. The absence of words becomes its own kind of language. Music shows this clearly. Notes alone don't make a melody. The rests between them do. A pause in a song builds tension, gives rhythm, and lets emotion expand. Composers mark those spaces carefully because silence shapes sound. In conversation, the same rule applies. A pause can emphasize what came before or prepare for what comes next. It can signal reflection, hesitation, or respect. The timing changes the meaning. In writing, silence appears as punctuation. A dash, an ellipsis, a paragraph break. All are pauses disguised as marks. They guide how the reader breathes. When a writer leaves space, they trust the reader to feel what isn't said. Hemingway used this often, writing short sentences that hinted at emotion instead of naming it. The silence between words gave his stories their depth. What grammar couldn't carry, silence did. Different cultures hear silence differently. In Japan, a pause often shows thoughtfulness. People wait before answering to show respect for the question. In the United States, Silence can make people uneasy. It feels like a gap that needs filling. Western conversations race forward, afraid that quiet means disinterest or tension. But in many other places, silence is a kind of punctuation for sincerity. The same moment can feel awkward in one culture and peaceful in another. The difference lies not in sound, but in how we listen. Pauses also reveal emotion more honestly than speech. When someone hesitates before answering, that space speaks. It might hold uncertainty, guilt, or care. A quick reply can hide thought. A pause shows it happening. In this way, silence becomes a window into what language tries to cover. The truth slips through the breaks. Actors and speakers understand this instinctively. The most powerful lines often follow a moment of quiet. The pause gives weight to what's about to come. It draws attention, makes the listener lean forward. A well-placed silence can say more than a paragraph. It invites the audience to meet the speaker halfway, to fill the gap with their own meaning. Even in relationships, silence works as a kind of grammar. Every couple builds their own rhythm of speech and pause. A long quiet after an argument can mean distance, or it can mean reflection. A shared silence during a walk can mean comfort. Over time, people learn to read these pauses like sentences. The relationship grows not just through words, but through the spaces between them. Technology has made silence harder to find. Messages arrive instantly, and delays feel like rejection. A pause in a text conversation seems heavier than it is. When someone doesn't reply, we fill the gap with fear or frustration. Yet even digital silence carries meaning. The absence of response is still communication. It tells us something, though we might not like what it says. The syntax of silence survives, even in code. There's a kind of silence we carry inside ourselves too. Before we speak, before we think, there's a pause where awareness rests. Meditation touches that space. It's not emptiness, but presence. Sound without noise, meaning without words. From that silence, thought takes shape. Grammar begins. Every sentence we ever speak starts from there. Poets often try to write around silence rather than over it. They use short lines, soft breaks, and plain language to leave room for the unsaid. The silence inside a poem isn't blank, it's alive. It invites the reader to feel rather than analyze. When we encounter a line like, "The world is quiet here," what moves us isn't the grammar, but the hush it opens. We recognize something in that stillness we can't name. Silence doesn't erase meaning, it holds it. The pause after a question, the breath before confession, the moment before applause, all are part of language. Grammar organizes speech, but silence gives it depth. It allows truth to exist beyond structure. In every conversation, between each line, we pass through that space, listening not just to what's said, but to what's waiting underneath. Words have weight. Some barely hold our attention. Others pull us back again and again. These words act like gravity. They shape how we think without asking permission. They anchor us, even when we believe we're thinking freely. A word's pull doesn't come from volume or length. It comes from how deeply it has entered our shared mind. Once a word gains gravity, it bends thought around itself. Think of the word freedom. It appears simple, almost transparent, but every time someone says it, 1,000 meanings rise with it. Political, personal, spiritual, each listener feels the weight in a different way. The word pulls conversation toward itself, making everything orbit its force. People fight wars over its meaning, write laws in its name, and build identities around it. Yet no one owns the word. It keeps moving, always heavy, always vague. Its gravity never weakens because it carries emotion, not precision. The same happens with words like truth, love, or justice. They seem solid, but they shift shape depending on who speaks them. Truth for a scientist means evidence and testing. Truth for a poet might mean something felt, not proven. When two people use the same word but mean different things, they're caught in the same orbit without ever touching. The pull of the word keeps them circling, never landing. We meet this gravity in daily life. A manager tells a team, "We need to be more productive." The word productive sounds clear, but no one hears it the same way. For one person, it means efficiency. For another, it means exhaustion. The group spends hours debating how to meet the goal, but the word itself controls the discussion. It shapes what seems possible. They don't question it because it feels natural. The gravity of the word has already done its work. Some words gain this pull through repetition. When media or leaders repeat a term, security, growth, innovation, it gathers mass. Each repetition adds weight until the word feels self-evident. Few stop to ask what it means or whether it still describes reality. Growth, for instance, sounds positive, but in the economy, endless growth strains the planet. Still, the word carries enough gravity to make alternatives sound strange. It keeps thought locked in orbit around one idea. Words also gain power through memory. A child hears home and feels warmth, or maybe fear, depending on their past. Years later, that word still pulls emotion before thought. A single phrase, "come home," "leaving home," "going home," can release a flood of feeling. The gravity is personal but universal. We all carry words like that, charged with our own histories. They steer our inner lives more than we realize. Language in politics relies on this pull. Terms like patriot, terrorist, or enemy shape public thought long before facts appear. Once labeled, people stop questioning. The word defines reality. A terrorist can never be a citizen, even if the acts are the same. A patriot can justify harm because the word protects them. Political speech works by adjusting gravity, adding emotional weight to some words, stripping it from others. The words that win attention win the mind. Art can shift gravity too. Poets and novelists take words that have become heavy and make them light again. When a poet writes, "Freedom is a chair in the sun," the word steps out of its orbit and becomes something you can touch. The new image breaks the old pull. For a moment, thought moves differently. This is what art does. It rearranges the gravitational field of language, giving new paths to meaning. Sometimes, gravity hides in small words. Take should. It doesn't sound powerful, but it tugs at behavior. I should call my parents. I should be happy. Each sentence carries obligation. The word turns wishes into duties. Even when we resist it, we feel its pull. It speaks from somewhere deep, where culture and upbringing live. You can't escape it by ignoring it. You can only notice its force. Social media amplifies lingual gravity faster than anything before it. Hashtags become planets of meaning. Hashtag hope, hashtag justice, hashtag freedom. Millions repeat them, often without context. The more a word spreads, the heavier it becomes. People gather around these digital orbits, drawn by shared emotion more than shared understanding. The gravity feels comforting because it connects, but it can also trap. Once inside, new words struggle to escape the pull. In personal relationships, gravity shows up in the words we return to again and again. A parent calls a child responsible, and the word sticks. A partner says, "You're difficult," and the label becomes part of the self. Over time, these repeated words define identity. The person starts to live inside their orbit, seeing themselves only through that pull. Words not only describe us, they determine which directions feel possible. Even silence has its own version of gravity. The absence of a word can weigh as much as speech. When someone refuses to name a feeling or avoids a subject, the space around it fills with tension. The unsaid pulls at the conversation until it breaks. We sense the missing word as clearly as we hear the spoken ones. In this way, gravity doesn't depend on sound, it depends on presence. Every language has these invisible centers, words so charged that thought can't escape them. We may believe we use them, but they often use us. They gather meaning, emotion, and history until they become larger than language itself. Even when we try to drift away, they draw us back, quietly shaping the path of what we can imagine and what we dare to say. Every conversation begins with good faith. We open our mouths expecting others to hear what we mean. But language doesn't carry pure meaning. It carries history, bias, and fragments of other voices. We think we're communicating, yet most of what we exchange are echoes bouncing between our own assumptions. We build tall towers of talk, each one made of slightly different bricks. When our words meet, they rarely align. The story of Babel describes this perfectly. People tried to build a tower to reach heaven, but their shared language broke apart. No one could understand anyone else, and the tower stopped growing. The myth survives because it feels true. Every era builds its own Babel, nations, ideologies, even families, where language seems common, but meanings drift apart. We keep talking, stacking our words higher, unaware that the foundation is already divided. Think about an ordinary argument. Two people use the same words: love, respect, trust, but each means something different. One says, "You don't respect me," meaning they feel unseen. The other hears, "You think I'm controlling," and defends instead of listening. The conversation turns into translation work neither person realizes they're doing. The words collide and echo inside their own meanings. By the end, both feel unheard, though both have spoken clearly. Language is never neutral. Every word comes wrapped in memory and experience. When someone says home, they might think of safety, while someone else remembers conflict. The same word lives in different emotional weather. When those meanings meet, misunderstanding feels personal, but it's really structural. We're not failing to listen, we're speaking from different towers. Culture builds these towers high. A phrase like work ethic means diligence in one setting and exploitation in another. Freedom sounds noble until people disagree on whose freedom matters. Entire societies talk past each other, using identical words. Each side believes it owns the meaning, but language doesn't belong to anyone. It shifts with use. The louder we speak, the more we hear only our own echo. Technology has made this echo stronger. Social media rewards certainty, not understanding. Phrases like fake news, cancel culture, or woke bounce around until they lose definition. Each group uses them to point at others, not to clarify thought. The tower grows taller and louder, but less stable. The echo replaces dialogue. We scroll through words we recognize, but meanings we no longer share. Even in close relationships, Misunderstanding is constant. You say, "I need space," and mean you need quiet. The other person hears, "You don't care." You say, "I'm fine," to end a conflict, and they take it as indifference. Every phrase travels through two histories, yours and theirs. Each history distorts sound a little, like static on a radio. What arrives is not what you sent. Writers face Babel's echo on the page. A poet might write, "The sea remembers," thinking of grief. A reader might feel nostalgia instead. Both interpretations are real, but neither matches exactly. Language connects writer and reader through shared symbols, yet that connection depends on difference. The gap between them isn't failure, it's the space where meaning grows. Every piece of writing is a bridge built over misunderstanding, never beyond it. Science isn't immune to this echo. Specialists use precise language, but even precision depends on context. A biologist's theory means a tested framework. To the public, it sounds like a guess. A psychologist's disorder may be a clinical term, but to a patient, it feels like a label. Clarity inside one tower becomes confusion outside it. Each field of knowledge builds its own dialect, making translation an endless part of progress. History shows the cost of these linguistic towers. Conflicts often begin with words, mistranslated treaties, slogans misunderstood, speeches taken differently by separate audiences. The language of unity turns into division because no phrase stays universal for long. Even peace agreements rely on interpreters to narrow. Never erase the gap between meanings. Babel never vanished. It just learned to write contracts. Still, misunderstanding isn't always failure. It reminds us that meaning isn't fixed. Every time words slip, we glimpse how fragile communication really is. The echo is proof that others think differently, that perspective can't be shared perfectly. When someone misunderstands us, it's not always because they weren't listening. It's because we spoke from different ground. Silence can sometimes cut through babble more clearly than speech. Sitting with someone in quiet recognition avoids the trap of definition. No translation needed, no echo bouncing back. In that stillness, we don't reach heaven, but we meet halfway among the scattered bricks of language, aware that our towers lean in different directions, but still stand close enough to hear one another breathe. We often admire precision in language. A clear sentence feels strong, confident, and complete. It leaves no room for confusion. But precision also cuts away the space where mystery lives. When we sharpen words to exactness, we reduce what they can contain. A perfectly defined sentence may describe something accurately, but it cannot hold what refuses to be measured. Think of a scientific definition. Water is H2O. The formula is exact, and it's true, but it leaves out. We often admire precision in language. A clear sentence feels strong, confident, and complete. It leaves no room for confusion. But precision also cuts away the space where mystery lives. When we sharpen words to exactness, we reduce what they can contain. A perfectly defined sentence may describe something accurately, but it cannot hold what refuses to be measured. Think of a scientific definition. Water is H2O. The formula is exact, and it's true, but it leaves out everything we feel when we see rain, or drink from a cold glass, or watch a river move. The sharper the language, the less of that experience remains. The sentence explains, but it no longer evokes. In chasing precision, we trade depth for clarity. The mystery of what water means to a person disappears inside its accuracy. Writers and speakers face this paradox constantly. A poet might spend hours searching for one exact word, only to find that the truer line is the one that leaves space open. The sky was blue is clear. The sky was tired is less precise, but it stirs something wider. The second line invites imagination. The first tells us what to see. The second asks us to see for ourselves. Precision can inform. Ambiguity can reveal. We use precision to protect ourselves from uncertainty. In conversation, we define our feelings to make them safe. Someone says, "I'm angry," and the word builds a border around what they feel. But anger often hides sadness, disappointment, or fear. The sharp label narrows the experience. It becomes something manageable, something you can name and move on from. The vagueness of emotion is uncomfortable, so we trap it inside precise language. Yet what we gain in control, we lose in understanding. Modern life rewards sharp speech. Workplaces demand concise emails. Schools train students to write thesis statements. News headlines boil stories into single phrases. The clearer the sentence, the easier it is to digest. But this kind of language trains us to think in summaries. We learn to remove the blur that gives thought its shape. When we reduce everything to what fits in a single sentence, we flatten complexity into slogans. Progress, success, change. Each word looks clean, but hides a dozen meanings underneath. This happens in science, politics, art, and relationships alike. A politician promises transparency, but the word itself can't hold the mess of governing. A scientist describes life expectancy as a number, though no one experiences life as an average. Even love becomes something we measure: compatible, healthy, long-term. We build vocabularies of control and forget that not everything can or should be controlled. Precision also hides time. When we say something exactly, we freeze it. A sentence like "the lake is calm" captures one instant. A minute later, it's false. The surface has already changed. Precision works by isolating a moment from its motion. The sharper we make the sentence, the less room it has to move. Language becomes a snapshot of something that was still breathing. We see this in education. Students are asked to define a concept rather than describe it. They learn to aim for closure, not curiosity. The essay with the clearest argument earns the grade, while the one that questions too much looks uncertain. Yet most truths live in uncertainty. The world doesn't always fit inside outlines. The sharper the answer, the smaller the question becomes. Precision has its beauty, of course. The mathematician's equation, a surgeon's incision, a pilot's control, each depends on exactness. But when that precision crosses into language, the cost is often mystery. A precise sentence can't hold what it can't measure. It may tell you how something works, but not why it matters. It can show the map, but not the feeling of the journey. In art, this trade-off is clear. Abstract painting, improvisational music, and poetry rely on suggestion rather than instruction. A painting of a single blue square may feel empty, but that emptiness invites projection. It becomes a mirror for the viewer's mood. The more specific the image, the smaller that mirror becomes. Precision limits participation. Mystery invites it. We experience this in daily speech too. Imagine sitting beside someone you love and saying, "I care about you." The sentence is accurate, but it feels thin. The feeling behind it reaches further than the words can stretch. A look, a pause, a touch. These communicate what grammar can't. Precision fails because feeling isn't an equation. The sharper the phrasing, the more of the truth slips away into silence. Technology has made precision feel like virtue. Every message, every post, every statement must be short and clear. We trim nuance until only certainty remains. We measure the success of language by how little explanation it needs. But that efficiency leaves out the room where wonder lives. Before we speak, there's a pause, a quiet moment where meaning hasn't yet taken form. In that space lives the wordless core. Every sentence grows from it, though language can never fully reach it. It's the place where feeling turns into thought, where thought tries to find words, and where words fall short of what we mean. We live inside that tension every time we open our mouths. Imagine a person watching the ocean at dusk. They feel something wide. Maybe awe or sadness or calm, but it has no name yet. When they try to describe it later, they say, "It was beautiful." The word works, but it feels thin. It covers the surface of the experience, not its depth. What they felt existed before the sentence, and when the sentence arrived, most of it slipped away. The word beautiful is a bridge to the experience, not the experience itself. We use language to share what happens inside us, but the inside can't be fully translated. Even the simplest emotions, love, fear, grief, resist capture. When we say, "I'm sad," we package something that lives in color, texture, and rhythm into a single sound. The feeling becomes smaller but easier to carry. Words give shape to the formless, but they also erase part of it in the process. We trade fullness for clarity. Writers face this gap with every line they write. A poet may feel an image burning in their mind, a tree bending in wind, a face half in shadow, but the moment they write it down, it changes. The words don't fail because they're wrong. They fail because they're human. Language is a net thrown over water. It catches the outline of what moves beneath, not the thing itself. The writer learns to work with the loss, to suggest instead of define. The art lives in what remains unsaid. Children show us what the wordless core looks like before language hardens around it. A toddler feels hunger, fear, or joy as pure sensation. Their body speaks before words do, crying, laughing, reaching out. When they learn language, their world expands but also divides. Dog becomes separate from cat, mine from yours. The naming creates understanding but also distance. The wordless blur of being turns into categories. What was once raw and direct now moves through filters of speech and thought. In relationships, this core shows up in small silences. Two people who know each other well can sit without talking and still understand. A look or a touch carries more than a sentence could. The meaning passes through gesture instead of grammar. When someone says, "I don't know how to explain it, but you get it," they're pointing toward that shared space beyond words. It's not emptiness, it's recognition without explanation. Even science, which depends on precision, begins from the same place. Every theory starts as a sense of pattern, a hunch, a question that can't yet be phrased. Einstein's ideas about relativity didn't begin with equations. They began with an image, a man falling from a roof, a train moving through light. The math came later. Before every definition, there is intuition. Before language, there is noticing. Artists and thinkers try to reach back toward that source. Painters use color to touch the unspeakable. Musicians use sound. Dancers use motion. All of them start from the wordless and try to bring it closer to form. The work succeeds when it reminds us of what words can't touch. The power of art lies not in what it explains, but in what it awakens. Technology, for all its speed, has pushed us farther from this quiet place. Our devices demand constant output, messages, captions, responses. We fill silence with words until the wordless feels uncomfortable. Even when we're alone, we narrate our lives in our heads. The private stillness where meaning forms gets crowded out. We start thinking in posts instead of pauses. The language becomes faster, but the thoughts grow thinner. Meditation and prayer, in their own ways, move in the opposite direction. Both ask us to sit before the word appears, to stay close to the source. People describe this as peace, but it's really clarity, the return to experience before explanation. In that space, there's no story to manage, no self to defend, only awareness. When language falls quiet, the mind doesn't go blank, it wakes up. The wordless core isn't mystical, it's ordinary. It's there every time we hesitate before speaking, when emotion catches in the throat, or when a view leaves us silent. It's the beginning of language and its limit at once. Every sentence, no matter how precise or poetic, starts from something that cannot be said. The best words remind us of it, the space before speech, the quiet pulse beneath thought, where meaning first takes breath, but never quite becomes sound. Every language carries its past within it. When we speak, we don't start from scratch. Our words come with layers of history, fragments of older conversations, and traces of beliefs that no one remembers consciously. We think we're choosing fresh language, but much of what we say has already been said, long before us, in contexts we'll never fully know. These are conversational ghosts. They live inside familiar phrases and ordinary words, shaping meaning from underneath. Take the phrase rule of thumb. Most people use it to mean a general guideline, but the expression may come from an old custom where a man was allowed to beat his wife with a stick no thicker than his thumb. That origin is debated, but the shadow of it remains. Each time the phrase appears, a faint trace of that past lingers, even if the speaker doesn't know it. The words carry the echo of old power. The present sentence feels neutral, but it isn't empty. Many words we use every day began with meanings that would surprise us. Sincere comes from a Latin phrase meaning without wax, referring to statues that were whole rather than repaired. Salary comes from sal, the Latin for salt, because Roman soldiers were once paid in it. The language we use to describe honesty and work still holds traces of ancient trade and craft. Even when the old context disappears, the words keep their ghosts. They whisper across time, invisible but alive. Our speech habits preserve history in subtler ways too. Consider how we use metaphors built from old technologies. We say we dial a phone, hang up, or tape a show, even though no one uses rotary phones or cassette tapes anymore. The actions have vanished, but the words remain. They move through generations as linguistic fossils, proof that language remembers more than we do. We carry the dead technologies of speech into new machines, and in doing so, we remind ourselves that meaning doesn't evolve cleanly. It drags its past behind it. Idioms work the same way. When someone says the whole 9 yards, they rarely think about where it came from. Some claim it referred to fabric used for making suits. Others say it described the length of ammunition belts in World War II. The truth doesn't matter as much as the persistence of the phrase itself. It lives because it feels right to say. Ghosts don't need facts, they need rhythm. Language keeps them alive through sound and habit. Even simple greetings carry echoes of belief. Goodbye began as God be with ye. Bless you after a sneeze came from the fear that sneezing released the soul. These small gestures of speech are leftovers of prayer and superstition, softened by time. We use them without faith, but the faith is still there, buried under centuries of repetition. Our politeness is built from the bones of our ancestors' fears. Conversation itself is haunted by tone and memory. A child learns words not only by hearing them, but by feeling how they're used. A parent's sigh between sentences, a teacher's pause before correction. These form patterns that shape the child's future speech. The ghosts in language aren't just historical, they're emotional. When someone says, "we need to talk," a phrase carries every uneasy conversation that's ever used it. The meaning isn't just in the words, but in the accumulated weight of how they've sounded before. Social change leaves ghosts too. Words that once excluded or demeaned can linger in the structure of everyday talk even after they're disapproved of. When people say manpower, they're echoing a world that assumed only men worked. Master bedroom, chairman, hysterical. Each carries traces of bias embedded in history. We can change our values faster than we can change our speech. Language walks slower than culture. It remembers what we'd rather forget. We also inherit personal ghosts. Think about a phrase your parents used, something like "money doesn't grow on trees," or "because I said so." You may roll your eyes at it as an adult, but you probably hear it in your own voice one day. The words come uninvited, as if passed down like family heirlooms. When we speak, we don't just echo society, we echo the people who raised us. Their ways of phrasing things, their tone, even their pauses, these haunt our speech long after they're gone. Writers sometimes try to expose these ghosts by showing where words came from. Poets especially feel them. When they use an old word like thou or kindred, they awaken not only its sound, but the centuries of emotion attached to it. Modern poets often play with this tension, mixing ancient phrases with new slang, making the ghosts visible again. It reminds readers that language is layered, never pure, always carrying echoes of what once mattered. In the end, every conversation is a kind of seance. We call on words, and they bring their past with them. The way we phrase our sentences, the idioms we choose, the tones we inherit, they all come from somewhere older. We think we're original, but the ghosts speak through us. Our language is a living archive, filled with voices that never fully leave, whispering through the gaps between what we mean and what we say. When we speak, we believe we're in control of what we say. We choose our words, shape our tone, and hope our meaning arrives intact. But language has a way of slipping past intention. Every sentence leaks. Some of what we mean escapes unnoticed, and some of what we never meant seeps through. The result is rarely what we planned. Words carry more than thoughts. They carry echoes of emotion, memory, and habit. They spill more than we intend and less than we feel. Imagine someone saying, "I'm fine." The phrase is short and simple, but the tone, the pause, or the glance that follows often contradicts it. The listener hears two meanings at once, the spoken one and the one beneath it. Language leaks through tone as much as content. Even silence leaks meaning. The words on their own mean stability, but the delivery suggests tension. What escapes isn't error, it's truth slipping out sideways. This happens in every kind of conversation. At work, a manager tells an employee, "We value your input." The words sound respectful, but maybe the tone is rushed, or the eyes wander to the clock. The sentence says one thing, the atmosphere says another. The real message, the one the employee hears, is shaped by everything left unsaid. Meaning leaks through hesitation, gesture, and rhythm. Words are only one part of the message, and often the least reliable part. Writers know this problem well. A novelist describes a character's grief, but no matter how carefully the scene is written, it never feels as large as real loss. The sentences can show tears, describe the silence in the room, or capture the smell of a hospital corridor. Yet the reader still senses a gap. The writer feels more than the page can hold. The story leaks emotion through what it cannot say directly. The unsaid becomes as heavy as the written. The same is true in love. When someone says, "I love you," the words are clear, but they can't contain the full weight of what they mean. They point toward the feeling, but don't equal it. That sentence may carry passion, comfort, or habit. It may be a confession or a routine. The speaker may not even know which. The listener fills the rest with imagination. Each side hears something slightly different. Between them, meaning leaks both ways. Too much from one, not enough for the other. Even in arguments, words betray us. A person might shout, "I don't care," in anger, but the very act of shouting reveals that they do. Emotion bleeds through the cracks of denial. The language tries to block feeling, but tone exposes it. The more we try to hide what we feel, the more it leaks. Words are porous. They hold emotion for a moment, but can't contain it completely. Everyday speech hides these small leaks everywhere. A compliment can sound condescending if said too sharply. A joke can wound when it touches something true. A statement meant as neutral can reveal bias without intent. When someone says, "You speak so well," they may mean praise, but the phrase leaks an assumption that they didn't expect you to. Our language carries the residue of culture, not just thought. Technology amplifies this problem. In texts and emails, tone vanishes, but meaning still leaks through word choice and timing. A delayed response reads as distance. A period at the end of a short message feels cold. We write thinking we're clear, but others read through their own filters. Without the warmth of voice or the rhythm of silence, words spill out in directions we can't predict. Clarity becomes illusion. Even self-talk isn't immune. When we describe ourselves to ourselves, we leak meaning we don't intend. Saying, "I always mess things up," or "I'm not good at this," builds a story that shapes behavior. The words start as expressions of frustration, but they harden into beliefs. What leaks out becomes identity. We think language reflects us, but it also writes us. Language, by its nature, simplifies. It turns the full spectrum of experience into a manageable number of sounds. A single word like anger must stand in for hundreds of shades, from quiet irritation to deep rage. The reduction makes communication possible, but never complete. Every time we speak, we leave something behind. The fullness of feeling shrinks to fit inside syllables. The rest leaks into gesture, breath, and silence. We sometimes try to stop the leaks by being more precise. We add adjectives, clarify tone, and explain our intentions. But even precision leaks. The sharper the sentence, the more it cuts away the invisible parts of meaning. The tighter we grip language, the more slips through our fingers. A scientist can describe a sunset by its wavelengths, but the awe still escapes. A poet can describe it in metaphor, and something deeper appears, but never the whole thing. Meaning isn't a fixed shape that language can carry. It's a moving current, and words are the containers we dip into it. Some spill, some overflow, some crack. Every sentence we speak is both an attempt and a loss. We say more than we plan and less than we feel. Yet it's the leaking that makes language human. The way truth escapes through tone, gesture, silence, and all the places grammar can't reach. ... When we dream, language loosens. Words and images fold into each other without warning. A person turns into a place. A voice becomes a color. Events happen without logic, but feel entirely natural while they last. Dreams remind us that grammar is only one way of making sense, not the only one. Inside the mind, order doesn't need punctuation. Meaning flows without commas, periods, or pauses. Imagine describing a dream the moment you wake up. You say, "I was walking through a house that was also a train, and my mother was there, but she looked like a stranger." The sentences stumble because grammar can't keep up with the shape of dream logic. You add words like "and then" or "but somehow," trying to stitch order into what didn't have any. Yet when you recall it silently, it still makes sense. You remember how it felt, even if you can't explain why it fit together. The dream spoke a language beyond structure. Dreams use a kind of grammar made of feeling. One image leads to another not by syntax, but by emotion. A door might open because you're afraid, not because it follows in sequence. A person might appear because their presence feels right, not because it's rational. In waking life, we depend on words to organize thought. In dreams, emotion organizes experience. The logic of the heart replaces the logic of the sentence. Freud once called dreams the royal road to the unconscious. He believed they use symbols to disguise desire. Modern science looks instead at how the brain processes memory and emotion during sleep. But both views agree that dreams rearrange our inner world. They turn scattered fragments into stories. The difference is that those stories don't obey punctuation. They move in circles, repeat, fade, or stop mid-thought. Their grammar is breath and rhythm, not subject and predicate. This dream grammar shows up in art too. Painters like Dali and Magritte borrowed it to create scenes that make emotional sense but logical confusion. A melting clock or a man with an apple for a face doesn't follow grammar, it follows association. The viewer feels the meaning rather than decoding it. Poets do the same with words. A line like, "I am the dream of the sea," would sound strange in prose, but in poetry it lands as truth. Dream grammar lets imagination speak in its own accent. Children live closer to this grammar before schooling trains them out of it. When a child says, "The moon followed me home," adults might correct it, but the child isn't wrong. They're speaking dream logic aloud. Their sentences mix wonder and perception without needing rules. Over time, we trade that fluidity for correctness. We learn to punctuate our thoughts, to separate what can mix. We gain clarity, but lose the strange coherence that once came naturally. Sometimes this dream grammar slips into our waking speech. When someone is in love, in grief, or in fear, their sentences break or wander. They say things like, "It just feels like everything's falling," or "I can't stop seeing it." The words blur together because strong emotion pulls them back toward the language of dreams. The mind stops caring about grammar when it tries to express what grammar can't contain. Writers often chase this tension. Stream of consciousness prose tries to sound like thought before it becomes speech. James Joyce and Virginia Woolf wrote sentences that flowed without punctuation, trying to match the rhythm of the inner voice. Their work feels confusing to some readers because it refuses the safety of neat grammar. But that messiness mirrors how the mind really sounds. We don't think in periods and commas, we think in waves. Music also moves this way. A melody repeats, shifts, and returns without needing grammar to connect its parts. It speaks directly to emotion, not reason. That's why a song can remind you of a dream you never had. It carries the same kind of logic: feeling first, form later. When musicians improvise, they build meaning through pattern and intuition. Much like the sleeping mind, technology has given us new spaces where dream grammar appears again. Online, People type without punctuation, blending thought and tone in fragments. Messages that read, "Can't sleep thinking too much," or "Miss you already," sound unpolished but real. They capture emotion before language has time to clean it up. Even memes and short videos operate on jump cuts, not grammar. They connect ideas through mood, not logic. The internet, for all its structure, has revived the fluid grammar of dreaming. Dreams remind us that thought existed before language. The mind knew how to connect ideas before it knew how to name them. Grammar came later as a tool, a way to organize what was already moving. But beneath every clear sentence, that wordless motion remains. You can feel it when you pause before speaking, or when a phrase arrives in your head fully formed. The structure follows feeling, not the other way around. Inside our minds, punctuation never appears. We think in shapes, sounds, flashes, and fragments. When we wake, we translate those into grammar, forcing order on something larger than words. Yet part of us still speaks the dream language, a quiet current beneath our polished speech. It's the language that connects memory, image, and emotion before any sentence begins, where meaning exists without rules and makes perfect sense anyway. We spend most of our lives surrounded by noise, voices, screens, messages, and the constant hum of thought. Silence feels strange now, even threatening. We rush to fill it, as if quiet means nothing is happening. But silence isn't empty. It carries meaning as real as any word, and sometimes deeper. To translate silence is to notice what language hides, to hear what isn't being said but still speaks. Imagine sitting with someone who has just lost someone they love. You want to help. You search for the right words, but none fit. Anything you say feels too small, so you stay quiet. And in that quiet, something shifts. The person feels your presence without your speech. The silence holds more comfort than explanation could. That is language without sound, a form of listening that doesn't need translation because it already understands. In many cultures, silence isn't a pause between words, it's part of the sentence. In Japan, silence often means respect. In Finland, it signals comfort. In indigenous traditions, silence can show deep attention or wisdom. The Western habit of filling space with talk can seem impatient by comparison. We treat silence like a gap to be repaired, not a message to be received. Yet in some places, silence is grammar. It's how truth arrives without argument. Listening is one way of translating silence. When someone speaks, the silence between their words carries tone and meaning. The pauses tell you what matters most. A long break before a confession shows fear or hesitation. A short one can mean control. To hear someone fully, you have to listen to what they don't say as much as what they do. The silence after a sentence is often the part that reveals the most. We experience this in love and conflict alike. A couple argues late at night. Voices rise and fall. Then one person stops speaking. The silence between them grows thick. It's not absence, it's communication in another form. That quiet can hold anger, resignation, or care. Both people know what it means, though neither names it. When they speak again, the silence remains in the air like a memory. It shapes what follows. Writers know that silence lives inside language too. A line break in a poem, a pause in dialogue, a scene with no description. All these are ways of letting silence speak. Hemingway called it the iceberg theory. Most of the story lies beneath what's written. The reader feels what the writer has left unsaid. Great writing doesn't tell everything. It trusts silence to do part of the work. The blank space becomes meaning itself. Music works in the same way. A rest in a melody isn't emptiness, it's tension. The pause before the chorus, the quiet after a final note, gives sound its shape. Without silence, there's only noise. The listener feels the pause as emotion, not absence. The composer writes silence into the score because they know it speaks as powerfully as the notes. We often forget this in conversation. People talk over each other to show interest. They rush to respond instead of waiting to understand. But real listening means slowing down enough to let silence fill the space. It means allowing the other person's words to settle before shaping a reply. The pause tells them they've been heard. Silence becomes acknowledgement, not emptiness. In moments of decision, silence reveals more than speech. Think of a jury before a verdict or a surgeon before an incision. The quiet isn't hesitation, it's focus. It marks the shift from thinking to acting. The same is true in everyday life. Before saying yes or no, before confessing love or regret, there's a moment of stillness where truth forms. That silence isn't a delay, it's the mind aligning with meaning. Technology has made silence harder to find. Messages demand instant answers. A delay in replying reads as avoidance. Online, silence feels like absence instead of reflection. We've trained ourselves to fill every gap with noise, to post, comment, or react. But in losing silence, you lose depth. Quick replies keep conversation moving, but not necessarily understanding. The space where empathy grows has been replaced by speed. Silence also speaks in the natural world. The pause before rain, the hush of snow, the stillness at dawn. Each carries its own kind of language. We recognize it not with thought, but with body. The air shifts, our breath slows, and we sense meaning beyond words. That recognition doesn't need translation. It's older than speech. Listening well means returning to that kind of awareness. When we stop talking, we make room for what language can't reach. The tremor in someone's voice, the weight of their pause, the shape of the air between us. Silence doesn't ask to be filled, it asks to be understood. Sometimes the most honest answer isn't another sentence, it's presence. It's the kind of listening that turns quiet into connection, the truest form of speech. Everyday language depends on metaphor more than we notice. We use it to describe the world, to explain what we can't see, and to make sense of what we can't measure. But the strange thing about metaphor is how quietly it turns fiction into truth. We call one thing another, and then forget we ever made the comparison. The trick works because we stop seeing it as a trick. What begins as a shortcut for thought becomes the shape of thought itself. Take the phrase, "time is money." It started as a metaphor, not a fact. Time doesn't earn interest or fit in a wallet, but the comparison worked so well that we built a world around it. We spend our hours, save our energy, waste our minutes. The metaphor became so familiar that it turned invisible. When someone says, "I can't afford to waste time," they're not being poetic. They're speaking the logic of the metaphor as if it were real. In that small slip, language shapes reality. We do this constantly. We say we're in love, in trouble, or in pain, as if emotions were locations. We say, "I see your point," though ideas aren't visible. We talk about arguments as wars. You defend a position, attack an idea, or win a debate. These phrases feel natural, but they frame how we think. When argument becomes battle, listening turns into defense. When time becomes money, rest feels like loss. The metaphors don't just describe, they instruct. Metaphor's trick works best when it hides in plain sight. Consider computers. We speak of desktops, folders, and trash. None of those exist inside the machine, yet we navigate them as if they do. The metaphor turns a complex system into something human and familiar, but it also limits how we imagine it. Once a metaphor sets the frame, it becomes hard to think outside it. We forget that language is a map, not the landscape. This isn't new. Ancient cultures spoke through metaphor because it was the only way to bridge what they didn't understand. The Greeks said dawn was a goddess rising from the sea. The Egyptians called the sky a great river. These weren't primitive mistakes. They were attempts to translate experience into story. Over time, those stories hardened into facts. The metaphors turned into belief systems. That same process still happens today. We build our own modern myths, just dressed in scientific or digital language. Even our sense of self depends on metaphor. We talk about finding ourselves as if identity were a lost object. We build character, carry baggage, set boundaries. None of these are literal, but they guide how we act. If you think of emotions as things to carry, you might try to drop them. If you see yourself as a work in progress, you may always feel unfinished. The metaphors we live by quietly decide what kind of life feels possible. In relationships, metaphor reveals as much as it conceals. Lovers say, "You complete me," as though people are puzzles missing pieces. The phrase sounds romantic, but it carries an expectation that wholeness depends on someone else. The metaphor shapes emotion into dependency. A different metaphor could change the story entirely. If love were seen as a garden instead of a puzzle, care and growth would replace completion as the goal. The trick of metaphor is that it builds the world we act inside. Writers and poets try to use that trick consciously. When a poet says grief is a house that burns every night, they don't mean fire, they mean presence. The metaphor opens a door into feeling, but even poets can forget their inventions. A strong image takes root in culture until it stops feeling like imagination. The idea that the heart breaks, for instance, began as metaphor. Now, science finds evidence that emotional pain affects the body much like physical pain. The language became reality through repetition. Metaphor leaks into science itself. We talk about the genetic code, black holes, or cell walls. These words don't describe literal writing, holes, or walls. They're models that make abstract ideas graspable. But the metaphors also narrow how we imagine discovery. A code implies a secret to be cracked. A wall suggests division. If we used different metaphors, genes as songs, cells as gardens, our questions might change too. The direction of inquiry often follows the shape of the metaphor. Children show us what happens before the trick takes hold. When they say, "The moon follows me," they're not being cute. They're thinking metaphorically, blending perception and imagination without boundaries. As adults, we separate those worlds. We forget that we built language to make sense of wonder, not to replace it. What we call literal truth is often just an old metaphor that succeeded so well we stopped noticing it. We can't escape metaphor. It's how language works, but we can learn to notice it. To say the heart speaks or the city breathes is to play with connection, not to state fact. The trick becomes a tool when we remember it's a trick. The danger begins when we forget. Once a metaphor hides long enough, it becomes structure. We walk through its halls every day, calling one thing another, and never stopping to remember we were the ones who named it so. Language is always moving. Even when it looks stable on the page, it drifts beneath the surface, like a current under still water. Words change shape, lose force, gain new life, or fade into idioms that no one remembers how to use properly. We speak as if language were fixed, but every sentence carries traces of older meanings worn smooth by time. The drift is constant, and yet, somehow, we keep understanding each other. Take the word girl. Centuries ago, in Middle English, it meant any young person, male or female. Only later did it narrow to mean female child, or nice, which once meant foolish or ignorant, and then evolved to mean precise, and later, pleasant. These aren't small adjustments, they're transformations. If we met our linguistic ancestors, half our ordinary conversation would sound strange, even wrong. But that's the nature of drift. Words don't stay loyal to their first meaning. They follow use, not rule. Slang shows this in real time. The word cool began as a term for calmness in the early 20th century, then shifted to mean stylish or admirable. Bad became good, literally started to mean figuratively. Online, new meanings appear overnight. Ghosting, streaming, cloud, all borrowed from older contexts and reshaped for new worlds. What we call creativity is often just drift, speeding up. The meaning erodes, reforms, and spreads until no one remembers its origin. Erosion sounds negative, but it's how language survives. A word's meaning thins because it has worked hard. The more a word is used, the more flexible it becomes. Think of thing. Once it meant an assembly or meeting in Old Norse. Now it means almost anything, a habit, an object, an idea. The loss of precision became freedom. Thing can stand in for whatever we can't name directly. The erosion made it useful. Even words for time drift. Tomorrow once meant the morning of the next day. Now it covers the whole day. Soon once meant immediately. Now it can mean in an hour, a week, or longer. The edges blur because experience changes. Life grows faster or slower, and language adapts. We stretch words to fit our rhythm. Over generations, those stretches become the new normal. Writing tries to hold language still, but it never succeeds. Dictionaries record the river midstream. Every definition is temporary. When the Oxford English Dictionary adds a new word, it isn't inventing, it's catching up. Grammarians may argue about what's correct, but correctness is only convention with a deadline. A word that sounds wrong today may sound natural to our grandchildren. You was once plural only, like you all. It took centuries for it to become singular, too. What seems like error now is often the beginning of change. Technology speeds the drift. The internet compresses distance and time. A phrase can start as a joke on one side of the world and become global in a week. Memes and hashtags work like linguistic mutations, small, contagious shifts that spread through imitation. When someone types mood to describe a photo, or same instead of a sentence, they're bending grammar toward emotion. The meaning isn't precise, but it connects instantly. That connection is what keeps drift from chaos. Yet drift also reveals loss. Some words fall out of use, leaving silence where meaning once lived. Quoth, anon, forsooth. These carried rhythm and tone that modern English no longer has. When words disappear, they take small worlds with them. The shift from thou to you erased a layer of intimacy and hierarchy. Thou once marked closeness or equality, while you showed respect or distance. When English lost that distinction, speech became simpler but less textured. Drift smooths language, but can also flatten it. Still, understanding endures because meaning doesn't live in words alone. It lives in context, tone, and pattern. A child hearing slang for the first time doesn't know the dictionary meaning, but learns it through rhythm and use. Listeners infer more than speakers say. Even when words shift, intention bridges the gap. That's why someone from the 1600s could still follow Shakespeare today, even if some lines sound strange. The structure of emotion remains steady beneath the changing words. We trust language to work even when it moves, because we move with it. Our brains adapt faster than our dictionaries. We feel meaning before we define it. A word doesn't need to stay pure to stay powerful. It only needs to stay alive. Each generation receives a slightly different version of the same tool and reshapes it without noticing. Drift keeps language human. Words evolve, meanings erode, and still, when one person speaks, another understands. The signal carries through the noise, even as the language that holds it changes shape. What we call communication is really translation across time, a quiet act of faith in the fluidity of meaning. Every time we say I, we act as though the word points to something solid, something that stays the same from one moment to the next. But I is slippery. It names the self, and the self is always changing. The pronoun gives the illusion of stability, while the thing it refers to keeps shifting. It's like labeling a river with a single name and pretending the water never moves. Say you wake up and think, I need coffee. The I who says it has barely arrived in the day. A few hours later, you say, I'm ready to work. That's another version of you, more awake, maybe more hopeful. At night, when you say, I'm exhausted, the word I reappears again, standing in for yet another person with different thoughts, feelings, and priorities. The grammar stays the same, but the being behind it never does. The pronoun hides the movement by pretending it names one fixed speaker. Language makes this paradox necessary. Communication depends on shortcuts, and I is the shortest of all. It lets us speak as if we were unified when, in reality, the self shifts with every mood and memory. If we had to specify which version of ourselves was speaking each time, conversation would never end. We use I like a mask, not to lie, but to simplify. It covers the change underneath, turning motion into identity. Writers and philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. The philosopher David Hume called the self a bundle of perceptions, a series of sensations with no fixed center. The psychologist William James described consciousness as a stream. Both saw what the word I tries to hide, that identity is process, not object. When we speak, we pause that process for a moment, pretending the river holds still long enough to be named. This tension shows up in memory. Think of a childhood photo. You look at it and say, that's me. But the me in the picture doesn't exist anymore. The body, the thoughts, even the voice have changed. What connects you to that image isn't substance, but story. The pronoun I builds that bridge. It stretches across time, linking many selves under one word. The illusion works because language needs it to. Without it, our lives would scatter into fragments. Still, the illusion can mislead. When someone says, I'm not the person I used to be, they're telling a truth that grammar can't fully hold. The same word, I, names both versions. The pronoun doesn't update. It keeps the label while everything underneath changes. This can cause confusion in relationships and in self-reflection. we cling to an old I long after it's gone, or we feel guilt for abandoning it. We speak as if the self were an object we could lose or find, but it's more like a pattern that keeps rewriting itself. You can hear this drift in how people talk after major change. Someone recovering from illness might say, "I'm learning to be myself again." The sentence suggests that myself is both lost and reachable, both constant and new. Language forces that contradiction. The pronoun I stays the same, even when the meaning behind it doesn't. Grammar freezes what experience keeps in motion. Technology adds another twist. Online, we use I across multiple identities, profiles, usernames, versions of self, edited through filters and posts. The digital I is curated, a performance. Yet when we type "I think" or "I feel," it sounds as though one stable person stands behind the screen. The pronoun acts like glue, holding together the fragments of self that we broadcast in pieces. The paradox deepens. We present more selves than ever, but rely on the same single word to contain them. Even in thought, the problem persists. When you think, "I should change," who is speaking to whom? The sentence divides the self into observer and observed, commander and commanded. One I issues the order, another receives it. Language allows this split, but hides it within the same word. The self becomes both speaker and listener, as if two minds share the same name. In meditation or deep reflection, that illusion sometimes falls apart. People describe moments when the sense of I disappears, a feeling of awareness without a center. The pronoun loses its anchor, and what remains is just perception. Later, when we try to describe it, language drags the I back in. I felt no self. Even that sentence repairs the paradox by pretending the self was still there to witness its own absence. Grammar restores what experience had dissolved. The pronoun gives us coherence, but it also limits how we understand ourselves. Every I is a snapshot of movement, a pause in a long film. We keep using it because we need to, not because it tells the truth. The mind shifts, the body ages, the voice changes, but the word remains the same. It points to something that never holds still, trying again and again to name what is already in motion. We live inside a world made of signs. Words, gestures, symbols, and images all point toward meaning but never fully reach it. They stand in for the things they describe, but they are not the things themselves. When we forget that difference, we start to confuse the map for the territory. Language feels clear, but underneath, it drifts like fog. Every sign points in a direction, yet none lands exactly where we mean it to. Take something simple, a stop sign. The red octagon doesn't contain the act of stopping. It only signals it. You don't stop because the metal commands you. You stop because you've learned what the symbol means and you agree to obey it. If you place that same sign in a desert where no one drives, it would lose its power. Meaning only exists inside shared understanding. The sign works not because of what it is, but because of what we bring to it. Without us, it's just paint on metal. Language works the same way. Every word depends on agreement. The word tree doesn't contain bark or leaves. It's a sound we've all decided stands for a living thing with roots and branches. But that agreement isn't perfect. Someone from another language hears tree and it means nothing. Even within one language, tree can shift. A Christmas tree, a family tree, a data tree. The meaning spreads outward like mist, reaching in many directions, but never touching the thing itself. Semiotics, the study of signs, tells us that meaning always moves between 3 points: the sign, the object, and the person interpreting it. That triangle never closes completely. When you see a photograph of a person, You recognize their face, but the photo isn't them. It's a layer removed. The more signs we stack between us and the world, words, screens, icons, the thicker the fog becomes. We navigate by symbols and call it reality. Advertising depends on this fog. A logo isn't just a mark. It's a signal loaded with emotion. The swoosh on a shoe doesn't make you run faster, but it makes you feel like someone who could. The image of a smiling family on a cereal box doesn't make the cereal taste better. It points toward an idea of happiness. Companies spend billions shaping these signs so that when you see them, you think not of objects, but of belonging. The meaning doesn't live in the product. It lives in the association. We move through a cloud of signs that sell feelings rather than things. Social media multiplies this fog. Every post, emoji, and reaction is a tiny sign pointing toward a feeling or idea. A photo of a sunset isn't the sunset. A heart emoji isn't love. But in the constant exchange of these symbols, the difference starts to fade. We scroll through images of lives that look perfect and respond with more signs, likes, comments, faces. Meaning circulates without landing anywhere solid. The more we communicate, the murkier the understanding becomes. Even conversation can thicken the fog. When someone says, "I'm fine," the words might mean, "I don't want to talk," or "I'm hurt," or "I really am fine." Tone, context, and history change the meaning every time. The sentence itself is a sign, and we read it through layers of experience. Misunderstanding happens because we mistake the sign for the truth. A fog forms in the space between intention and interpretation. Writers and artists often work with this uncertainty instead of fighting it. A poem doesn't tell you what to think. It leaves openings for you to fill. A painting of a face isn't the person. It's pigment shaped to make you feel their presence. The artist guides you through the fog, not out of it. The power lies in suggestion, in how signs echo each other without settling. That's why art can mean different things to different people. The sign never closes, it keeps breathing. Religion and politics rely on symbols too, though in heavier ways. A flag, a cross, a slogan. Each carries centuries of emotion. People fight over these signs as if they were sacred objects, forgetting their representations. A flag stands for a nation, but it isn't the nation. A slogan stands for belief, but it isn't the belief itself. When people cling to symbols as truth, the fog thickens into blindness. They defend the sign while losing sight of what it was meant to point toward. Everyday speech hides this process in plain sight. Phrases like "the heart wants what it wants" or "follow your dreams" sound clear but dissolve under scrutiny. The heart doesn't want, and dreams don't lead. These are metaphors that have hardened into cliches. Once they sparked emotion, now they drift through conversation as empty signs. We keep repeating them because they sound meaningful, even when they've lost their meaning. The fog is comfortable. Technology has deepened the illusion. Artificial intelligence can now generate signs, words, images, voices that feel real but aren't anchored to experience. It mimics meaning through pattern, not presence. We interact with symbols that no longer refer to human intention. The signs still point somewhere, but where they lead grows harder to trace. In this new layer of fog, the difference between representation and reality blurs even further. Still, the fog isn't failure. It's how communication works. Every word, image, or gesture reaches partway toward meaning and stops. The rest depends on the listener. Understanding happens not when the sign delivers truth, but when both sides meet in the middle of uncertainty. Signs point everywhere, at once, and somehow, that's enough for us to find our way. We never reach home, but we keep walking through the mist, following signals that shimmer and fade, carrying just enough light to move us forward. Stories are lies told in the service of truth. Every time we tell one, we invent details, compress time, and choose perspective. Yet through that invention, something real appears, something that facts alone often miss. Fiction, memory, and even everyday retelling all work this way. We lie to get closer to the truth. That's the honest lie. Every story is true, not because it reports events accurately, but because it reveals how things felt. It's true in the way dreams are, emotionally right, even when the details drift. Think of how people remember their childhood. Ask two siblings about the same event, and you'll hear two versions. One remembers the summer as golden and endless. The other remembers boredom and heat. Both can't be factually right, but both speak a truth. Memory shapes itself into story, smoothing edges and exaggerating color. What we call remembering is already a form of storytelling. The lie begins there, small and innocent, but it carries honesty in how it mirrors perception. Writers understand this instinctively. A novelist may invent characters who never lived and places that don't exist, but readers still find themselves in the fiction. The events may be false, but the emotions are recognizable. A story about a soldier who never fought can still tell the truth about courage, loss, or guilt. The details don't have to be literal for the meaning to be real. We respond to stories because we sense our own lives hiding inside them, disguised by imagination. Everyday speech follows the same rule. When someone says, "I had the worst day ever," they don't mean it literally. They mean they felt drained or defeated. The exaggeration helps translate feeling into words. The listener knows the statement isn't factual, but still understands the truth behind it. A small lie clarifies emotion. We use language like this all the time without thinking about it. If we stripped our speech of metaphor and exaggeration, conversation would sound flat and mechanical. The lie makes honesty possible. Dreams work in a similar way. They take fragments of experience and rearrange them into something that feels symbolic. You might dream of losing your keys, but the dream isn't about keys. It's about loss, anxiety, or fear of control slipping away. The mind tells itself a story to express what logic can't. When we wake, we can't treat the dream as literal truth, yet it tells us something real about ourselves. A story does the same thing. It distills feeling into image. It's the psyche speaking in metaphor. The difference between a fact and a story lies in purpose. Facts tell us what happened. Stories tell us what it meant. A courtroom demands accuracy, but a life requires narrative. We need stories to make chaos understandable. Without them, experience stays raw. A disaster becomes bearable only once we can say, "Here's what happened, and here's why it matters." That explanation is never neutral. It's shaped, trimmed, and polished until it fits into something we can hold. The honesty of a story lies not in precision, but in intention. History itself depends on this paradox. A historian selects sources, chooses emphasis, and builds a narrative out of endless data. The result isn't a pure record, it's an interpretation. Even when grounded in evidence, history is storytelling. The facts remain the same, but meaning shifts depending on who arranges them. That's why one event can be called revolution in one country and rebellion in another. Truth bends with perspective. The story becomes a kind of mirror, accurate in reflection, but shaped by the angle of view. We trust journalists and scientists to separate fact from fiction, but even they use story to communicate. A science paper follows narrative structure: a question, a method, a result, a resolution. A news article does the same. The structure guides understanding. Without story, information would be chaos. We rely on sequence and cause and effect to make sense of data. The storytelling instinct gives knowledge shape, even when the storyteller believes they're only reporting. Art takes this even further. A film, a painting, a song. They all lie through creation. A director invents dialogue. A painter bends light. A songwriter compresses years of feeling into 3 minutes. None of it happened as shown, yet we believe it because it feels true. When an audience cries at a scene, they're not responding to fact, and responding to recognition. The lie has delivered something deeper than evidence, the echo of shared experience. Even personal identity is built from this same trick. When you describe yourself, your childhood, your choices, your beliefs, you're telling a story. You leave things out, highlight others, and shape your own history into coherence. The I you present is a version made of words, not an exact record. Over time, you start to believe it completely. The story becomes real because it holds together, not because it's precise. Every person lives inside the story they've told about themselves. This is why we need to handle truth with care. Facts matter, but they rarely satisfy. People often turn to fiction, religion, or art, not to escape reality, but to find a truth that feels more complete. A parable may never have happened, yet it reveals something about being human that a statistic can't. The Bible, myths, folk tales, and novels all use lies that point toward truth. The details are invented, but the emotions are not. We tell stories to organize chaos, to see ourselves, and to share understanding. The lie inside every story is the tool that lets truth take shape. A story doesn't have to be factual to be honest. Like a dream, it rearranges what we know into what we need to see. Every story is true in that way, the truth of feeling, not of fact. It's an honest lie, a shaped illusion that tells us who we are. There are moments when words fall away and meaning still passes between people. A look, a gesture, a pause. These can say what sentences can't. We like to think language is the main way we understand each other, but often, the deepest understanding happens after language has run out. When words end, comprehension sometimes begins. Imagine someone sitting beside a hospital bed. The person in the bed is too weak to speak. The visitor doesn't know what to say, so they stay quiet. Yet in that quiet, something clear exists. The silence says everything both want to say. Love, fear, the ache of being present. There's no confusion, no need for explanation. Understanding lives in the space words can't fill. Everyday life hides the same truth in smaller moments. A friend pauses before answering a hard question. A parent and child share a glance that replaces an entire sentence. A couple sitting in a car after an argument feels connection return, not through speech, but through the stillness between them. Communication continues even when language stops. The body, the eyes, the air all speak. Language gives shape to thought, but it also limits it. When we name something, we freeze it. A feeling becomes smaller once it's spoken. Saying, "I'm sad," draws a border around an emotion that might really be grief, confusion, or longing. The word clarifies one part and hides the rest. Sometimes, when we stop talking, we return to the larger, wordless field that thought comes from. The silence isn't emptiness, it's freedom from reduction. We often try to fill silence because it makes us nervous. In meetings, people talk over pauses. On dates, quiet moments feel like failure. On the phone, we fill gaps with small talk. But what if silence isn't absence? What if it's signal? In music, a rest gives rhythm shape. In conversation, silence does the same. It allows meaning to settle. It invites listening. Without pauses, speech becomes noise. Cultures treat silence differently. In Japan, silence can show respect. In Nordic countries, quiet between people isn't uncomfortable, it's natural. In many indigenous communities, pauses allow space for thought. But in much of Western culture, silence feels like something to fix. We treat it as a breakdown in communication rather than part of it. Yet silence can carry understanding across distance, culture, and time. It doesn't need translation. Writers and artists understand the power of what isn't said. A good story leaves space for the reader's imagination. A painter leaves blank areas to make form visible. A filmmaker holds a shot for a few seconds longer than expected, letting the audience feel rather than think. The absence of words draws meaning out of the viewer. It's not explanation, but invitation. Speechless understanding depends on trust that the listener will meet you halfway. Think of how people communicate grief. After loss, the words offered, "I'm sorry for your loss. They're in a better place," often feel thin. The person grieving doesn't need explanation. They need presence. A hand on the shoulder, a quiet meal shared, or someone simply sitting nearby says more. Words try to close wounds. Silence acknowledges them. It tells the truth that nothing can be said, and that truth becomes the comfort. Children understand this instinctively. A small child will climb into a parent's lap after a fright, not to hear reassurance, but to feel it. The body carries what language can't. Before we learn to speak, we communicate through gesture and tone. That part of us never disappears. Even adults rely on it. Touching a hand in apology, nodding in agreement, turning towards someone in sympathy. These are forms of speechless understanding that words can't replace. Science has begun to explore this too. Studies in communication show that tone and body language often carry more meaning than actual words. People can sense honesty or deceit through rhythm and movement long before they can analyze content. The brain reads emotion faster than it processes language. Understanding begins before language arrives. Spiritual practices often use silence as a form of truth. In meditation, the mind quiets until words lose their grip. In prayer, silence becomes a way of listening rather than asking. In nature, silence reminds us that comprehension doesn't depend on explanation. You can stand at the edge of the ocean or beneath a night sky and feel a kind of knowing that no sentence could express. It's not thought, it's recognition. Technology has made silence harder to find. Messages, notifications, and constant talk fill every moment. We equate connection with exchange, typing, replying, posting. But the more we talk, the less we listen. The speed of communication has outpaced understanding. A pause now feels like lag, not space. Yet real connection still depends on what happens between words, the timing, the waiting, the awareness of another person's presence. Even in argument, silence can be the moment when understanding begins. When tempers rise, words lose meaning. People talk to defend, not to connect. But after the noise fades, in the quiet that follows, something shifts. Reflection happens. Emotion settles into thought. The silence becomes fertile ground where empathy can grow again. Speech can reopen only after silence has done its work. Speechless understanding isn't mystical, it's ordinary. It's in the shared quiet of watching a sunset, in the way people move together without planning, in the unspoken agreement between two strangers on a crowded train. Words organize the world, but silence reminds us we belong to it. When words end, Comprehension doesn't stop. It deepens. It listens. It begins again in the space where language finally lets go.